The focus of today's presentation is transaction cost theory, also referred to as transaction cost economics. And I'm just going to take a moment and bring you back a few videos ago to when we talked about Thorelli's work. He had that continuum of markets versus hierarchies, and the market of course being the open market, where it's mainly exchange relationships, versus hierarchies, which are highly vertically integrated organizations. And in the middle, we had those networks of organizations, and we talked about the benefits of having the multiple interactions of a network, and being nimble within the context of an emerging industry, and being able to capitalize on new opportunities and adjust your partners to keep in line with the strategic objectives of your organization. In the last video, we looked at those 11 different factors that would help a manager decide, how do you decide what type of relationship you have? How do you decide when to go in the market? How do you decide, whether to partner, to ally, to vertically integrate? We talked to some of the issues of bounded rationality and opportunism, and how they can create challenges for managers and organizations when they're trying to make these really critical decisions. So today, we're going to make it even harder. Actually, hopefully we'll make it easier. But what we're going to do is take a look at the foundational works of two gentlemen, both Nobel Prize winners in economics. The first was Ronald Coase, who actually won 2 Nobel Prizes in economics for his theory on transaction cost. That was really a lot of his theory emerged in 1937, so quite some time ago. And despite its renown, it didn't receive a lot of further rigor in terms of research until Oliver Williamson's work in the 1960s and 70s. And so the research that's posted on Sakai, and much of the research and literature that we see on transaction cost today, is really from Oliver Williamson's work. What we're going to do today is delve a little bit more deeply into what both these gentlemen have to say about markets and hierarchies and how you should make those decisions. So we'll start first with Ronald Coase, and this is one of his many publications. So looking at the firm, the market, and the law. And interesting, he started out with these really foundational questions about the nature of the firm, and why do we need firms, and how do we decide how big a firm should get. For him it was really a matter of solving these really initial questions, and instead of taking a look at it from the perspective that we saw from Thorelli and some of the other theorists that we've discussed in the context of this course, he decided to look at the nature of the firm based upon costs. So this is really how his theory and the theory of transaction cost differs from what we've looked at before. So essentially, his theory was that if it cost an organization too much to buy a product or a service in the open market, that they would vertically integrate. Okay, so they would reduce the costs again of searching, of information, of developing contracts, of overcoming bounded rationality and opportunism by assuming all of those costs within the confines of one organization. Of course, that's the vertically integrated organization, MLSE we talked about, vertically and horizontally integrated. And so what he did was really try to narrow down and focus upon exactly what those costs were, and then how they then influenced what the size of the organization would be. The underlying premise of Coase's work is that organizations seek to avoid costs. And that makes sense. As a business, why do you want to spend money on doing things that you don't necessarily need to do, right? Why take on expenses that are unnecessary to the core function of your business? So then he tried to look around and say, well, what types of costs do organizations incur, not necessarily to actually produce their products and their services, but to manage the interactions of acquiring the goods and services that they need to produce those. And so what he did was look at what are the, so again, if we're in that open market, you're negotiating. And remember we talked about price being that adversarial nature where the buyer is trying to get the lower price and the seller, of course, is trying to get the higher price. And then they undertake this negotiation. And then he extended beyond that to the point where if you did reach a negotiated price, then you'd have to, if you were going to, then work, you've chosen from among those different sellers, then you'd have to have some type of a contract that would say that. And so right away you've had to pay somebody to negotiate that, and then you've had to pay somebody else to write up that contract. And then you're monitoring that provider of that good or that service to make sure that the quality of the product or service that they're providing to you is of the particular standard that was originally identified in the contract. So imagine the detail needed in that contract depending on the nature of the good or the service that they're providing. And when we think about even a collective bargaining agreement between a players union and a league, it's a book this thick about absolutely every single element that would manage that relationship between the monopoly, the cartel, which is the league, and the Players Association, which is a monopsony, right? They're the only providers of that high caliber talent within that sport of hockey or basketball, football, rugby, whatever the sport is. And then how do you actually govern that relationship between those organizations? And so this was the original confines of those costs that he identified. And then Oliver Williamson went on to expand upon those lists of costs that were originally identified by Coase. So again, the original costs were the negotiating for the actual agreement, the monitoring after you've set out your contract, and then the actual governance of the relationship. So Oliver Williamson, again, who extended the work of Coase, went on to, again, focus on costs, but importantly, he highlighted the notion that there are also costs within the confines of a vertically integrated organization. And those are those administrative costs that organizations have to hire managers to oversee employees. And that even in the confines of it within an M-form, multidivisional form, vertically integrated organization, you still need employee contracts. You still need all of the guidelines of what the employees' responsibilities are, how they're going to be assessed, what their payroll will be, whether or not there are going to be bonuses. And then you're still monitoring to find out whether the employees are shirking. So just because it's an organization that you're dealing with on an open market and you're a bit at risk of opportunism, and we looked at that, someone maybe taking advantage of your company, or you think that you're going to buy the highest quality of leather for the boots or the purse or whatever it is that you're making, and it turns out that they're selling you a lesser quality product, right? So, but that can also happen within the confines within the organization. And so Williamson really extended that idea of what those costs are, because they apply not only within the context of the market, but also within the vertically integrated organization. Transaction cost theory is an approach that draws attention to the costs involved in negotiation, retaining, and monitoring interorganizational relationship. The term costs refers to those characteristics or dimensions of a transaction that make the exchange problematic. So both Coase and Williamson were quite critical of traditional economic theory that really took out the socioeconomic aspect of interorganizational transactions. And what I mean by that is this notion of opportunism, and that we're dealing with human beings. An example of the human element of transaction costs would be something like shoplifting. So if you own a store, and huge department stores or retailers would build into the costs of their business either the cost of having goods actually stolen by the five fingers, right, the five-finger discount, or the cost that it would take to prevent people from stealing their goods and services. And of course, we've all gone to buy a pair of jeans and they've got the magnet, and it, you know, flashes, you know, if you leave the store. And certainly we have the RFID chips now that are embedded in all of the products that we buy to help manage theft. But it still costs money for organizations to overcome the human nature of people trying to circumvent having to spend money, right? Circumvent having to pay the full cost for an item. So the types of costs that were identified, and some of these we've explored a little bit earlier when we looked at exchange relationships on an open market, are search and information. So identifying all of the potential providers of a certain good or service that you're looking for, establishing the quality, reputation, potentially going out and visiting the store, finding out what their distribution methods are, how timely the distribution is, the cost of the distribution. And I think all of us have been through this ourselves when we're going out to buy a new computer, and we're doing that, you know, comparison shopping, which is smart. But imagine if you're a corporation and you're hiring someone to do that search, right? To gather all of that information about the potential sellers of the product or service that you're looking for. And again, part of that might be the informal discussions of going to somebody who might have used that product or service in the past and said, gee, how was this supplier? You know, what was the quality of goods? Did they supply them on time? Did they get the order right? If they were ordering sneakers, you know, did the right size come? Did you get more left shoes than right shoes when the order arrived? So, you know, so imagine the amount of time that takes, and imagine paying somebody to undertake that search and information. So when you think about the cost of an organization and what it produces, it's not just actual manufacturing. You're starting way back, developing all of those costs of actually acquiring those products and services, and finding out which ones you should acquire, which organization is going to provide the lowest price with the best quality, with the best service. And by service, I mean it's on time. They're going to deliver the right amount of products and services at the quality that you want. So the next cost that you'd be looking at is the bargaining and negotiation. So you've identified maybe 3 or 4 potential sellers of the good or service that you're looking for, and then you need to actually have that negotiation with them where you're trying to, you know, either maybe reduce the price or get more quantity of that particular product for the same price, or potentially ask them to increase the quality of that product, hopefully at the same price, or maybe a marginal increase in that price. So you've narrowed down your whole scope of all the suppliers, and then you've done this bargaining where you're trying to find out which is the optimum seller of that product and service to your organization. And after you've narrowed that down to, we'll say, 4 or 5 organizations, then you have to decide. You need to look at all of the particular pros and cons in each one, each particular benefits, strengths, weaknesses, you know, the dependability, reputation, what have you, of those organizations, and then actually make that final decision. And that decision likely wouldn't be made just by that one person that did that original search and information, right? That person is going to take a report where they've found the information on the different providers of the product or service, and then it'll be a group of people, or potentially a few people, sitting down and actually, following that negotiation, then sitting down and actually making that decision about which organization they're going to essentially have as their main provider. So you've chosen the person that's going to provide that product or service that you're buying. Then you need to police that and reinforce it. So, especially at the beginning of the relationship, you're going to be monitoring that shipment, and you're going to, of course, be looking at, did they show up on time? What was the quality? Were they damaged? What was the shipper that they used? What was the actual going through the actual inventory of what was purchased and making sure that was done. And I remember when I was with the Niagara Ice Dogs when they were back in Mississauga, we had a huge shipment of jerseys, and we literally had, I think it was probably about 40 pages of itemized list of all of the different memorabilia, t-shirts, whatever they were going to sell in their store. And then we had to go through every single box and check it off and refer it to make sure what we had actually purchased was what we had actually received in those boxes. So imagine the hours that it took us to do that. So there's that time, right? That's part of that, process. And then what happens if you're missing something that you've purchased? So maybe you've asked for hockey pucks that say Mississauga Ice Dogs on it, and you've requested 100 of them and you only got 20, or maybe they're the wrong color, or maybe it's not the actual size of a hockey puck, or you were supposed to have a logo on both sides. Goodness knows, whatever the criteria that you had originally laid out for the product. So then you need to undertake that process of going back to that organization and figuring out how they're going to solve that problem. All right, so just having a bit of a chuckle here. Imagine your job is like counting your products and then going back and complaining if you didn't get the right thing. Who wants to do that? Can you imagine the time and energy and toll that it takes? And imagine that you're hiring people. These people aren't even actually going to be selling your product. They're not even part of anything to do with your customers. Of course, they're making sure that you have everything there to sell to your customers. But these are, if the order and the inventory isn't done right, then you're then assuming all of the costs to correct it, right? So these are the types of costs that Coase and Williamson were talking about, that when we think about an organization and interactions, and of course I'm promoting strategic alliances and partnerships and all these interactions, but what are these other hidden costs that are involved? And we're not even through the costs yet, all right? So then you go back to the original supplier and you show them, the whatever evidence that you have that they didn't provide the inventory. Now, ideally, their response would be, sorry about that, we'll redo that product for you, or we didn't realize it, or we've got this other box that we didn't send to you, it's on its way, we're going to get it there as quickly as possible. So that would be the ideal response, right? And so great, no problem, that's an easy phone call to have. What happens if that's not the response? So this is where enforcement comes in. If you don't get that, yes, we're going to have that inventory to you right away response, which ideally you would, then you need to enforce the contract, right? You've got this written inventory of products that you're purchasing, and clearly they've said that they're not going to provide that to you. So then you need to hire a lawyer, right? You need to undertake a whole other expense to enforce that contract, right? That sales contract that you originally set out. So imagine the cost and the time. And here as an organization is where you'd weigh it out. Can you imagine the cost of, if it's over hockey pucks, you're not going to go hire a lawyer to do that. You would probably write potentially maybe you have a higher level manager call maybe the higher level person in their organization. So here we're going to move out of their inventory distribution level of the supplier's organization, and we're going to go to maybe the vice president or the president, the owner, someone else. But again, that's taking the time and energy away from your vice president or your president of your organization. Do they really want to be dealing with this? Do they have the time to be dealing with this? Imagine how much they're getting per hour to have to deal with some hockey pucks. So what you could do is, just write that off as a cost, right? You're just going to absorb that, and then you've learned a lesson that you're not going to use that supplier, and then you'd go back to all of your, cost number one, that search and information, and find another supplier. Right? And then go through the process again. So that enforcement, a couple of different ways to deal with it. To hopefully, wouldn't take too much of a nudge to get them to provide you with what you purchased. You can go through your organization and theirs to try to have them fulfill the agreement that was originally negotiated, or you could just write it off as a cost to the organization and then look for another supplier. But remember, then you're going back to the whole negotiation phase all over again. Right? You're absorbing all of those costs again when you start to deal with a new supplier. Sam, Batty, and Dean applied Coase and Williamson's work to the relationship between a sport organization and a corporate partner. So we'll definitely be taking a look at their article and discussing it in our case this week. But just think about sport organizations. 68% of sport organizations were seeking relationships with corporate partners. So imagine the search and information that they'd have to do. So you'd be identifying, you'd have a set of criteria within the context of your organization that you were seeking in terms of the corporate partners, and then you're doing all of that search and information, right? You're finding out as much as you possibly can about a corporate partner that might have those aligned values and beliefs and strategies to link with your organization. You're developing your deck, right, of all of the different assets that your organization has for sale, and then you're proposing that and then negotiating that with either the potential sport organization or the potential corporate partner, and then again, watching out for that opportunism, that policing, that reinforcing, that ongoing monitoring. So Sam, Batty, and Dean do a great job of taking you through that process, and we'll definitely be looking at that in the case this week. So in the context of sport, or more broadly in business, it's worthwhile to try to offset those transaction costs that we discussed earlier from the get-go. So part of that is planning and safeguarding. So one that I mentioned earlier is looking at the reputation of an organization, phoning up your contacts and finding out who in the industry has a good reputation, either as a corporate partner, as a supplier of a good or a product or a service that you're looking for. So, providing that information and safeguarding your organization in advance is one way to then, hopefully diminish some of those costs in terms of the monitoring or policing or enforcing that you might have later on. A second way that you can overcome some of those initial transaction costs that we discussed are adopting and servicing. And this is typically done within the context of sport by hiring account managers, right? So they're the people that work with the partner, so with the provider of the good or the service, or with the corporate sponsor, to continually keep in touch with them to make sure that is everything okay. So what information do they need? Do they need assistance? Is everything on track? How is timing going? The same thing with a supplier of a good or a service. It's picking up the phone. It's having that personal relationship, those contacts, and having a more of a interpersonal relationship rather than just a commercial business relationship that then is a little bit of that grease that eases those economic transactions. So I'll just tell you a quick story that I used to work for Surrey Parks and Rec way back in the day. And we had one supplier, so we ran, I think it was 47 different sports programs within one of 5 geographic areas of Surrey. So this was anything from adult badminton to football to tennis, children's judo, swimming, what have you. So imagine any type of sport, summer camps, what have you. And so we're constantly buying thousands and thousands of dollars worth of sports equipment. And so we had this one supplier, and I kind of adopted him when I got the job. So someone else had already done all of that, search and information, that work for me. But this guy, he was great. He called all the time. Laura, what do you need? Is there anything? I'm going into the plant today. Let me know what you're going to need and I'll give you a call back and see. And he'd drop into our office. If I had one of my instructors phone and say, they lost some volleyballs or the school lost the volleyballs, I could phone him up and he would have them for me for that volleyball class that night. So he was absolutely hilarious. But what's interesting in terms of the interpersonal relationships, so this guy had just an amazing sense of humor. But he had this, and he's on the road all the time, right? He's driving everywhere because he's supplying all these people with all of this sports equipment. And I can't imagine how many organizations, that he's running around to. Anyway, this is, back in the day when vanity license plates were a new thing. And he used to phone us up, and we'd always put him on speakerphone in the office because he was so funny. And he'd be like driving along. Of course, I don't even think they had a non-handheld there, so he's probably on his handheld phone and he's reading out these funny vanity license plates to us because he's on the road and he's just wanting to have fun, but it was just a great way to keep in touch with us and add some humor to the relationship, but also really ease. So I knew that I could phone him day or night, anytime, and he would have that product or service to me. And the order was always 100%. But he was always keeping in touch sort of in advance. What do you need? I'm going to be doing this. Do you think you might need some footballs this year? Or summer camp season is coming up. Let me know when you get your inventory ready and I'll make sure that we have those for you. So this is that adopting and servicing costs. It's this individual who's taking that time out of his day to service this relationship between our organizations. And again, part of it is, of course, we're getting business done. He's making sure that I have all of the equipment that I need. For me, it's absolutely great. I know I'm never going to run out of anything and have any upset customers if they show up for a sport that night and we don't have, some of the equipment that they need. But it was his investment in that time in a really natural and fun way that then eased the relationship. And I never would have gone to another supplier. And we probably paid a little bit more to buy from him rather than Sport Chek or one of the big wholesalers. But I didn't mind paying that extra price because I knew I'd always have that fantastic service, right? It was just terrific. So certainly that's one way that you can reduce your transaction costs is by having this adopting and servicing. And here you're hiring someone specifically who either has those interpersonal skills to do that or it's their job. So in sport, particularly where corporate partnerships are related, you're hiring people to specifically service those accounts. So you would have someone who maybe has the American Express account, the Coke account, the McDonald's account, the Scotiabank account, and they have those limited accounts. and they're continually on the phone to their contact in those organizations to make sure everything's perfect. And then on game night, if they have a luxury suite, they're actually going to the luxury suite. They're making sure they're in advance that their fridge is stocked, and if they've picked out whatever items they want to have, delivered to their luxury suite for dinner that night, they're going to make sure that that's done to a T. So in advance, you're making sure that everything goes smoothly in that relationship, because then they're not having to have those costs to monitor, right? They're not having to check those things in advance. You're providing that service, to make sure that the relationship goes smoothly, because who wants to run out and have to find a new corporate partner every year? Right? Can you imagine the cost of investing, negotiating that relationship, and maybe it's a $5 million corporate partnership, and then they show up and either their signage isn't correct, their luxury suite isn't correct, they didn't get the tickets they expected, etc. Right? So you're safeguarding that relationship by investing in that account representative. So the final type of cost that is assumed by your organization, but again, you're offsetting those earlier costs that we discussed, is monitoring and evaluation. And within the context of sport, we've seen efforts by sport organizations to evaluate their relationship with corporate partners increase dramatically. So I'll just give you an example. So a corporate partner has paid for a rink board, and they want to know, if I had to purchase an ad on television versus a rink board, weighing out those costs, which one is going to be more effective at reaching my target market, my people who are going to buy my, hot dogs or hamburgers or credit card, whatever it is. And so sport organizations began to very, very specifically provide data on the effectiveness of the investment that corporate partner had made. So what they would do, and of course it's much more sophisticated now, but I'll just use this example to give you an idea. But they would, let's say it's the Tim Hortons rink board that's behind the net in a hockey game, okay? And what they would do is take a timer, and every single time that you would see, say this is a primetime hockey game, Toronto versus Montreal, right? So you're going to have X audience in terms of viewership and eyeballs, and then that's worth X monetarily from like the Nielsen's rating. So you're going to actually calculate of the 3-hour broadcast of the show, how many times did viewers actually see that Tim Hortons logo behind the net, right? How many? And then you're going to calculate that, and they'll say, okay, of that 3 hours, the visibility of that Hortons logo was, let's say it was 20 minutes. Okay, and then imagine calculating that if you had to purchase a 20-minute ad, 20 minutes worth of ads on that same hockey game, what would the cost be? It would be significantly more. Now, your ad, you can tailor it. It can be specific to a target market. It can, obviously achieve different goals and objectives than just that brand recognition that you would get. But certainly if it's on a rink board of an NHL venue, then they're also getting the brand association with that hockey team, right? So they're paying for that as well. But what you're doing is you're comparing, the value that you're giving for every single element that's included in that corporate partner package. So I've just given you one, but you could also count, if there's a write-up in local newspapers about a game and a partner's name is mentioned, then you're talking about that. Or you're taking photos if people are wearing Tim Hortons apparel, at a particular hockey game, right? Or if there's parents sitting around at even a community sport game and there's, Timbits hockey being played, well, how many parents are holding a Timbits coffee mug, as they're sitting there watching their kids, right? You're trying to give some evidence, some evaluation, because that corporate partner needs to have validation that they're getting a monetary or an equal to monetary return on the investment that they've made in your sport organization. So over the last 15, 20 plus years, we've seen the level of sophistication of this monitoring and evaluation grow dramatically. Now, data analytics, I mean, imagine what you can do with the software that's available on Google Analytics in terms of providing feedback right down to the number of clicks on an ad that somebody sees on a mobile app, right, on a sports app. Right? So you can provide all that real data back to your corporate partner. And that corporate partner then says, yes, this was a worthwhile investment in this organization. Now, it costs money for your organization to actually collect that data, put it in a really great report and presentation, and then give it back to the corporate partner at the end of the year. But that is far less expensive than the original search and information and monitoring, evaluation, and negotiation cost that we talked about earlier. Right? So you're kind of weighing it out as an organization and saying better to invest in that monitoring and evaluation, right? And here, the corporate partner may very well be doing the same thing, right? So they're showing up to their luxury suite, and they're probably going to check and see if they're also going to look and make sure that the fridge is stocked with what they asked for at the same time, right? But as the sport organization, you're assuming some of those costs because you want to maintain that relationship. You want to have a great relationship with that corporate partner, and you want them to continue to sign with you. Another area where sport organizations have made a considerable investment in relation to maintaining strong relationships with their corporate partners is in the area of commercial rights management. And what I'm talking about here is ambush marketing. So organizations need to do absolutely everything possible so that if an organization is, a corporate partner, so if it's the Olympic Games and it's a tops partner, that they've done everything they possibly can to make sure that a competitor can't ambush them, so that people at those games or people watching television don't think that another organization is the official sponsor. Last week, we talked a little bit about opportunism and bounded rationality. Both of those concepts are embedded within transaction cost economics. So you're assuming costs in your organization to overcome people who are shirking, people who are trying to take advantage of your organization. Now, what we might think of is, that's going to be a risk that we have to take if we buy something on the open market and we don't know. And so we'll be more inclined to vertically integrate. But that's not necessarily the case. Even within the confines of an M form, multi-divisional form of organization, you're hiring managers to supervise people to make sure that they're doing their job. Right? So those managers also represent costs to your organization. And the more levels that you have in your hierarchy, the more managers that you need to facilitate that integration, to do that monitoring, that enforcing, right? So those managers, they're going to make sure that the quality is there, that people are showing up on time, that people aren't shirking, that they're not taking time off when they shouldn't. So imagine the costs of that within the confines of the bounded vertically integrated organization as well. So here we can see, markets and hierarchies both having transaction costs involved, and this is why both Coase and Williams talked about transaction costs within the market and within the firm. Before we talk about limiting opportunism, I'm going to share a couple of stories. My husband and I just bought a new car. Great, my husband did all the search and information for us. We didn't buy here in Niagara, went up to Burlington to a dealership there. Absolutely amazing customer service right from the minute that we walked into the dealership. And I found out at the very end that the gentleman that we worked with, they're not paid on commission. which I hadn't heard of in auto sales before. They're evaluated based on customer service. So interesting that the goals of the organization, if they're to please the customer, then that's how they're evaluating their employees and how they're rewarding their employees. And so I received a survey via email a few days after the purchase to find out more about the customer service that I received. And then there was a follow-up phone call after that to find out if we had any questions about the car, the mobile app, etc. So one story about how they, really aligned the values of the organization to provide their goal there was to provide the best service to the customer, and certainly we were pleased with our whole experience. The second story might sound funny, but family loves bagel sandwiches for breakfast, lunch, dinner. And we found this really great supplier of bagels locally. And it's at the Hendricks Value Mart in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And I don't know why, I don't know how it is that they make the best bagels. But sometimes I go in and like they'd be the day old. And I was like, we really like them when they're just out of the oven. And then you freeze them and then they're squishy and delicious, for days to come. Anyway, I guess we're picky eaters in my family. Anyway, so one day I just went in and I said, how often do you like bake the bagels? And this guy was really nice, and he goes, well, just like phone me when you want them. Can you imagine? And so I phone up the store, like not really knowing what's going to happen, asked for the bakery department, and then the gentleman Matt comes on the line, and I said, oh hi, I'm just calling to see if you're going to be baking any bagels today. And he goes, I'll bake them for you. And he goes, what flavors would you like? And so I said, well, I'll take half a dozen cinnamon raisin, and I'll take a dozen sesame, But the guy was just amazing. And I sort of thought, here we have this, so many grocery stores, so many places where you can buy products and services. But here's a small store that competes based on customer service, and again, that's clearly known by the people that work in the store, right? It's all about those customer relations, right? It's all about going up over and beyond what those expectations might be. So how then do we take that to then limit opportunism, whether it's in a marketplace or within the confines of an organization? So number one is goal alignment. Everybody knows what we're working towards. Everybody understands whether it's customer service or entering into a new market, having the best product, innovation, whatever that is. And people buy into that, and then they're there. You don't need to monitor and supervise them because they're energized about what it is that they're doing. The second one is that you have this real team environment. So you don't need supervisors because everybody's working together to achieve those same goals. And you don't feel like you're in that policing role, which nobody really wants to be in that role, right? But if you have a team environment in your organization, then you're achieving those goals, but everybody's receiving this, mutual energy, satisfaction. If even one person achieves the goal, a sales goal that day, then everybody's really, pleased about that. So having that team and communication, of course, is absolutely critical. And a big part of whether it's inside the organization or relationships with external partners, it's those personal relationships. So, being able to call Matt on a Sunday morning and ask him, what's up with the bagels those days, or the incredibly, kind and really fun. They were very techy guys that we met, when we purchased the car. But even within the organization, having social events for the employees, making sure that everybody knows each other on a first name basis. Really hierarchical organizations where you have, a president, vice president, directors, managers, right? Well, if you can try in some way, shape, or form to diminish those hierarchical levels of an organization to a more linear type of structure, then people feel like they are more able to go in and share an idea, right? And you don't have to tons of lines of communication and up ranks in the organization to share what may be a really great idea that somebody has, or someone doesn't feel intimidated to go to someone in another level or department in the organization. Right? So planning and organizing and integrating your firm so that you're overcoming some of those barriers. So those are just a few, but we'll put some of these ideas up for you to take a look at.